All right. So everyone can see the wonderful start streaming screen for a second here as we get settled. I've got Barrett connected over on our Zoom setup, and it is time to go. So we are waiting for a few viewers to show up. Let me tell some of them.
Oh, this would be better. Why would that happen?
All right, everyone. We are live, and there is Barrett popping in.
Here I am, popping in.
Look at that. Look at Barrett over there in England now. Jolly old England.
Merry old England.
Merry, merry, merry. All right, so, you know, let's just jump right into things. You're no longer here in America. It is late as hell over there, isn't it?
I've been planning my departure for a couple of years, and just to add insult to injury, I announced my impending departure first on Russia Today a couple of years ago after the federales rearrested me for giving interviews to Vice and PBS when I was entirely legally allowed to do that. And so I left for Antigua about a month and a half ago. From Antigua about a week ago, I set sail, as it were, on a plane to England and arrived here safely. And now I'm an Englishman. There you have it.
Look at you. All right. So I'd love to kind of, we've got enough time here, go back a little closer to the beginning on all this. There are a few people who know some of our background, and most people don't out there. And I'm sure some of the viewers will too, but I always find it interesting to kind of start out this way. So, when I first learned of you was an article you had written in the Huffington Post. And it was an article where you so strangely said that some of the tactics that my friends were kind of putting together there over at Anonymous were going to be used to take down nation states in the future, whether it was us or, some other entity using the strategies. And I, of course, initially thought you were insane, and then reached out to you anyways because I loved the idea. And I sent you an email from one of our more official-looking email addresses, even though, of course, nothing is official, but it was anonymous@whyweprotest.net, just to kind of make the point of, no, it's like one of us. It's really, and you responded, and after a few days, we got to talking. And I think it was a week or so later that I invited you into some of the chats, and that's kind of how you met up with a lot of the people on our side of things. But it wasn't that long later that we were kind of working in Op Tunisia and Op Egypt and actually doing what your article said. And until those Tunisians showed up in chat, I thought you were insane on that one point.
Well, I might have been. It's possible. They stopped clock is right once a day, and if you're a crazy clock that just hits all kinds of numbers throughout the week, you're going to be right about a couple of things, and then only those things will be remembered. So it's just like cold reading, Yeah. But no, I was very just like our opposite numbers in the militaries and intelligence community of the world. You and I, you first, were cognizant of what the power was that existed in these new forms of collaboration and so forth. We saw that they were weapons. And you guys took the lead in turning what was not yet a fully realized weapon into a weapon to an extent that, over the next, say 13 years to follow since the kind of, the activist portion of Anonymous began, was responded to in very significant ways that, I will always treasure as recognition from the GCHQ and NSA and CIA and FBI and DOJ and Palantir and HB and so forth, a recognition that I was right, that we were weaponized, that we did have a grasp on something that could and would inevitably be used to confront nation states and institutions that are corrupt through and through on their own turf and win and push back.
It definitely started on that side of things with the protest and activism stuff, but we built on top of an existing foundation that you were already aware of at that point. You just weren't heavily involved. You weren't like sitting on the chans like some of us all day. You came around though. You were there for some of the Second Life trolling and things like that. But
Oh yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I dipped in here and there, and with the
yeah,
Second Life stuff, the Hal Turner stuff. I was late to the Habbo Hotel raids, but I
yeah,
did
yeah.
get in towards the end. But,
Yeah. So,
I watched them
those
fall.
early Anons really built a lot of mystique, a lot of ominous nature that we could build on top of when we went and did Chinology and all of the other protest actions later on. So, shout out to everyone who put in all that effort before. But yeah, so, there we are. We've done, Operation Tunisia, Egypt. We've all backed out at that point because Libya's going to hell, Syria's starting it. And we all, like, I mean, honestly, I know I ran for the hills. You were still on some of the IRCs for a few minutes longer than me, but I don't think much longer because they were asking for weapons and shit, and we wanted out. I did at least. So at that point, you start talking initially about some of your ideas towards taking these things that we've done, the tools that we're using, because at this point it's on 50 different networks. It's these IRC servers, it's these websites, it's this Google Doc or this pad, and every time someone started up a new operation, they would need to figure out 50 different tools and find them and be taught. Here's where and you decided that was a mess. And a few of the others of us had been thinking about it, and you started thinking about what it would look like to make a platform. And it took a little while before like Pursuance became a real actual mission, if you will, with a name and everything else. But that's what you've been putting a lot of effort into recently, yeah, for like last few years. Like that's been
Yeah,
all of it.
there's two different threads here, and one is that anonymous thread, and in terms of what some of what you're talking about in terms of making available in one package the tools and the concepts and all that, that I can't come anywhere close to taking credit for that. There were people pushing for that, not just pushing for it but doing it before that was my emphasis. What I was doing prior to that, though, around the time, before you pulled me into the anonymous servers when the Op Tunisia began in very late December 2010, what I've been doing was pursuing something alongside Michael Hastings and some a bunch of very straight-laced individuals. My second in command for Project PM, before it became what it's known for, was a retired IRS attorney.
Yeah.
To give you a sense of how mainstream I was back then. And our emphasis had been to build these structures, and this was before I had the knowledge and the experience, which has been very gained with difficulty over the last 10 years. Into
fun.
how organization it gained over in how organizations work, how activists work, how movements work, how structures work, how institutions work, and what the weak points of all these things are. And that was the hard won experience that I got, starting really with Anonymous. My prior experience had been well too organized to really learn anything from. And so Project PM, became it started out doing what Pursuance is now doing. It ended up becoming known for being a crowdsourced investigation, a collaborative investigation into the intelligence contracting industry and a number of the intelligence agencies, our opposite numbers there, and then their programs. And that was so successful that the FBI came and shut it down and served a search warrant listing that website and so forth, and then blah, blah, blah. And so we got so bogged down with Tunisia and Bahrain and Egypt and so forth, and then HB Gary and Mantech and the DOJ, and then going to prison and getting out of prison and virtual reality, that I had set aside my ultimate goal, which was to build this platform. I didn't know what it was exactly back then. I had a basic premise, which has been vastly improved upon as I've gotten input from people who, unlike me, have a real basis in the scholarship of information theory and some things I don't even know the names of. And so what we have now with Pursuance, which was formerly created as a nonprofit when I got out of prison, a few months after I got out of prison, late 2016, is this platform, this framework that is intended to be a universal solution, a very open source, entirely ground up, truly democratic, yet versatile solution to every problem of collaboration that we approach as human beings. It is a universal thing that can be used around a lemonade stand or run ICBMs or block, neighborhood police watch or whatever. It is intended more specifically, and one of the problems here is that we won't go into the mechanics of it here. For those who aren't familiar with it, I would advise reading. There's a great Observer article. If you just look up Barrett Brown and Pursuance, one of the first few results will be this Observer article that has an embed of the video presentation I gave, and has a great description in the article by the authors there of what some of the use cases of this, how this would operate, what it is, which I've historically done a very poor job of explaining. But that's why we have people, to help me explain these things. So we'll skip the mechanics. We'll just say, just leave it at this is a framework that is intended to move the ball forward in ways that I think, compared to 10 years ago, I think will ultimately reach the hype that we were getting from Michael Hayden and so forth, the NSA, back when he was giving speeches about how Anonymous was going to start taking over this, knocking down this. I think. In terms of information operations, entirely legal, entirely dutiful, necessary civic functions, Pursuance will allow these things to happen in a way that this time, unlike Anonymous or Occupy or anything else, will be vastly formidable, and to an extent that will prove itself when it comes into fruition.
So, as a lot of people who watch this, especially on YouTube later, are going to wonder, what is this all about? We're talking about platforms, we're talking about our old tactics, and, what it comes down to is this idea that there are certain ways you organize online. There are certain ways you build an operation that's going to be successful, and there are even more confined ways in which you gather data safely from people. And use sources and all the other fun things that are needed, all the way including from original idea to planning real-life events. There's 50 steps in there. And until, even recently, that's been 100 different tools you've got to learn to use. It's been, putting all your events on Facebook, which, that's fun. That's where I want all my data. And, it's all of this work and all of these different things that you have to train new activists on. When you could just take all of this distilled knowledge from all of these people who have already done all of this work and turn it into a set of tools that guides you through doing these things. And as I understand it, that's sort of what you're building.
Well, yeah, we're building, and the best way to describe it, I think, to the extent we don't have visual aids, is to compare Anonymous or Occupy or the civil rights movement or the anti-war movement or 100 other things to a jellyfish. A non-institutional movement is a jellyfish in a way, in so much as that it is soft. It's agile. It can extend its little appendages. It's not how jellyfish really work, but let's pretend jellyfish work like that. That it can move quickly and change shape and so forth, and that was a great strength. Jellyfish is also quite vulnerable. It has very little protecting itself from, let's say, the sharks, which we're going to pretend to eat jellyfish. I'm assuming they don't in real life. And that's a shame, because jellyfish have this great potential. People aren't expecting jellyfish. Jellyfish, if they do expect them, which, again, the U.S. military did. We see papers from 2009 in which one of the 5 big threats to whatever we represent as the U.S. military
right.
Was going to be these versatile, non-nation state, non-institutional, pseudo structures. And so, if you take that jellyfish and you give it not a skeleton to make it an institution, to make it a hardened, set in stone thing that can no longer evolve, but give it an exoskeleton that can grow along with it. Again, we're pretending exoskeletons do that. I don't think they do. Something that can protect it, can give it shape, can give it a consistent and understandable from its participants and fair and democratic ongoing shape. Procedurally, in a way I'll describe in a bit, then you have something very, very potent. You have something that hasn't been seen before in any real form, but you've seen pieces of it here and there. And you populate that with using a procedure whereby not everyone is welcome. Fascists aren't welcome. People who support the national security state are not welcome. People who oppose democracy and open society are not welcome. And you define that, but you don't actually enforce that. You don't have someone sitting there determining what the nation state is. You just tell people, hey, here's what we're about. And if you are coming in with these views, you will probably not find anyone seeking to help you. In fact, you won't. And so stay out. You won't deter everyone who shouldn't be in there. The people who have ruined the United States over the last, how you want to mark that, let's say the last 20 years. You won't have, you won't deter all police informants. You won't deter all corporate intelligence operatives. But between that element, this element of setting in stone, in a way, here is what it has been founded to be. Here is the ethos around it. You do help to settle a lot of unnecessary disputes in advance. The disputes you have in Anonymous or in Occupy Wall Street or anything else where there's no charter and anyone is free to interpret its charter or lack thereof in any way they want. You are freer from the splitting, from the unfortunate associations one ends up having to deal with as one becomes an activist, as one becomes a successful activist. You are freer from all these things that turn out to be, in my opinion, my estimation over the years, much more deleterious than anything the FBI can do. So again, this is all very abstract. It's very hard to sort of prove this anything, or to really give a good sense of how I can sit here and say this is better than this, better than that, without visual aids, but those are available. Just Google Pursuance, Barrett Brown, so forth. But it's so important to have this. It's so important for us to address at long last, after all these struggles, some of which have been successful and then maybe robbed of their effects by bad actors, some of which were not successful, all of which we can learn from. We can take all of that and expect to have all of the good parts of this, the advantageous and necessary parts of civic collaboration using the internet. We can expect to have this kind of take off in a way that can grow exponentially, defend itself from attackers, and improve itself, and maintain the ethical and moral underpinnings that movements always start with before quickly losing. Again, these are broad claims. I've made them before with more specifics. We'll just suffice this just for everyone. It would help if, I guess, everyone just assumes that everything I just said is correct for the record. That'll make everything go easier.
Of course, it always does. Always does. So here we are. A platform is coming. The general idea of the platform is that activists will be able to honestly do activism better. But one of the things that I think could come from a platform like this, if implemented, would be the ability for activists who are looking into starting something, whatever their activism is. I don't care if you plan on overthrowing the government of Eritrea or you're just trying to get rid of your local mayor. I don't care what level it's at.
Both of those are fine ideas, actually.
Right, exactly. I'm just saying, there's a ton of countries that need it. But at some point, you have to find comrades. You have to find people who want to help. And I would think platforms like this, if I'm talking perfect world, I'm going to be able to set up an operation and people on the platform are going to be able to see it, or there's going to be a way for me to invite people and, beyond just my friends, but other people who have successfully run ops on this platform before. Like, is that a big piece of this, the discoverability of new operations?
Yeah. It is. Yeah, that's one of the main pieces, really. The ability. Basically, this is what this comes down to: is having a pool, having a framework, a medium, a shared space online that's accessed via an app that will be usable on cell phones, very low quality around the world, so that no one's kept out of this, due to financial background. Having that. And having a protocol whereby you can expect that the people that you are dealing with, the pool of people on here, are, you still have to use your own judgment, as always, as you always shall. But you can have a good sense, a strong sense that the population you're dealing with is, on the whole, more along the lines of your own sort of support of the open society than you would find in, say, nations like the United States, which I recall elected Trump to office 4 years ago and just barely got rid of him recently, or is in the process of perhaps getting rid of him, depending on what happens in the next few months. So that's a big thing. Arbitration, being able to have a free collaborative system where freedom of association drives things and is a fundamental sort of right. That's an important aspect of all this. It is the aspect that, when not properly done, as it never can be in a charterless system where it's a movement, no one's in charge, there's no one to say here's blah blah. In the absence of that, it causes a massive amount of failed opportunities and threats and dangers and just, so forth. Being able to approach that problem and reduce it, alleviate it, not solve it, but alleviate it via ways that everyone can understand, that is a huge deal. It's been a bigger and bigger thing to me, and I'm sure to you, the more, I've spent dealing with other people.
Yeah.
It's one thing to sit and plan and think this is the way things would be, here's the other thing, but dealing with the other people who, for whatever reason, are involved in activism in your sphere, there was a French philosopher who once said, hell is other people. And that may be true, but of course, other people are also a necessity in collaboration. And so to diminish the frictions, to diminish the miscommunication, diminish the disputes over rights in which both sides have a point and nothing can be solved in that sense, to diminish that would be a massive and to me a more important goal. And so if that was all Pursuance aimed to do, it would be worth doing from my standpoint. It does aim to do quite a few other things, some of which sort of overlap with this same sort of impulse. But that's a good way of describing it. And as you said, being able to find others, being able to evaluate others according to shared methodology, consensual methodology, being able to find other projects that you might want to participate in or learn about or learn from or adapt, and to be able to articulate them and to build them and evolve them with others in structured ways that are not institutional. They are processional. That is vastly important. It is the most important thing we could be doing, because that is how we form ourselves into something that is up to the task of fighting a vast apparatus around the world, a very segmented, fragmented apparatus of kleptocracy and corruption and nationalism and so forth. We have to have the best possible procedures. We can't just win this thing on the strength of our ideals or the intensity of our feeling. Twitter will not suffice. The streets will not suffice. Nothing in itself can suffice at this point. And our opponents do not use any of those one venues. They use every single one. They engage in full spectrum warfare. We must do the same, and we must do it better than DARPA. That's a tall order until you remember that there is with none, for the most part. There are advantages that we have being open society people, transparency people who police our own and try to maintain ethics of our own, and who do not believe in obscurantism, because there's very little that can be revealed about us, nor should there be. As in, you and I both have been hit by the feds. You've been sued by Church of Scientology and so forth. In that process, they go through everything you have. They go through communications and so forth. They go through, in my case, they went through all my Gmail, kept for 8 years, my other Hush Mail accounts, all my IRC chats, with the intention of not just imprisoning me, but discrediting me. And I'm happy to say, I'm proud to say that as a transparency activist, they were not quite able to meet that hurdle, even with the advantage of having U.S. Air Force intelligence and FBI and DOJ with a couple years head start going through discovery files, my entire communications that I never had access to during this whole trial. And so that should be, I'm saying this probably to my own horn and to remind everyone that I should be trusted at the very least. Not my judgment necessarily, but my character and my intent should be trusted. My judgment, if my judgment were perfect, we wouldn't need decentralized, process democracy. We would just need me running secret cells of things. But, and it's a lot of pressure to put on someone anyway. So what I'm saying is that we have advantages to the extent that nothing can be leaked about us as such, ideally. Nothing can be exposed about us. We never have to have a meeting saying, oh no, they're going to find out this, this, and this. That puts us very much at the opposite spectrum of everything we're against. And so there are advantages to a free society kind of setup of people who advocate for a free society, so long as they are willing and able. That's the key word. We've not been able to police our own movement and ensure that it pursues exactly what it stands for publicly, and that those two things are the same. With a black box operation like WikiLeaks or Project PM when I ran it, where essentially everyone had to trust, me or Assange or, and other examples we can think of, you never have that guarantee, do you? you always have someone which pressure can be put upon. That was the whole point of giving me 100 years worth of charges to have to fend off, and charging my mother was to get me to, somehow, I don't even know what they wanted from me in this case, because it seemed like they pretty much had everybody at that point. But, that should never be the case. There should never be a single person who is the leader that they go after, or a leader, or whatever. There should be influencers. There should be people with ideas, but they should be in the business of influencing and having ideas. And there should be a place for those ideas and that influence and all these little bits and pieces of a movement to be presented safely and securely and openly to people who voluntarily would like to take those ideas and run with them. Pursuance is intended to do that. To give everyone, regardless of if they have the charisma or the adventurism or the sheer, innate criminal tendencies like you and I were, of course, born to, who our parents were.
Indeed.
Everyone should have, not just for their sake, but for the sake of the movement, the ability to efficiently bring that to the table, whatever they have, the work ethic, idea, a slogan, the ability to draw, the ability to put out things, the ability to understand the press, to write, to march. Everyone should be able to come to a shared space and sort out amongst themselves, using the best tools possible, how these things best add up. And that's what Pursuance is intended to do.
So you brought up the idea of, no leaders, right? There, people bringing ideas to the table, people bringing their thoughts, their missions, their ops to the table, and hopefully others would join them. And that's very much how we expected Anonymous to run, and how it did for a very long time, and to a lesser extent how it still kind of does. But one of the things that we would always describe when asked, well, how does that actually work, was very simple, once you know it, but very hard when you're standing on the outside looking in. And that's this idea that just because you had the idea, you're not in charge. Just because you started this op, you control nothing. You are in charge only in so much as you are here to transfer the knowledge of why you did this, who you're doing it against, and how you want it done, and in hopes that people will join you. But in the old Anonymous ways, at any point, the person who started an op could be run out of the op. In the old school, Anonymous is Anonymous's worst enemy kind of a way. So with Pursuance, when someone starts an operation and they kind of kick things into gear, is it possible to just ignore them at that point and move forward with other people? Do they have total control over it? Are you working on that?
Sure. So the answer to that is, and the answer to most questions along these lines is going to be, it varies entirely on the nature of the pursuance. So anybody in the let's say a pool of the pursuance, a process democracy mechanism, process democracy being the overall framework, the theory here, the practice, pursuance being the one iteration we're building and then curating. Anyone in there can either create a pursuance or, of course, ask to join one, so forth. There's other mechanisms for doing that. Creating a pursuance starts out always in the exact same way, and then it gets different immediately. But the first step is always that person creates a charter, an operating charter, something between DNA and the very beginning of an organizational chart. And that person at that point has entire control over everything. Now, that person presumably wants to have other people involved. So that person has a number of methods they can proceed with by which to delineate how that happens. They could immediately create several spokes, if we visualize this, in which and allow anyone to come and occupy these positions, and to set it so that those people will be entirely equal to them or superior to them in terms of how the voting goes, or if there's voting, so forth. So you can create a pursuance. It's your dictatorship originally, just like it is when you write something in a notepad. No one has access to that until you give it.
When you create a Facebook group before you add another admin with the privileges to remove you.
Exactly. Very exact same thing, right?
Okay.
And so that person can make an entirely democratic one. There's a number of ways they can do that. Just democratic doesn't really give us the full spectrum of options here. One can have it so that there's 7 people and they have to have a unified vote to do any major thing or anything at all. They could do it so that anyone could fulfill those positions, or those positions are temporary and then they're refilled by somebody else a week later or a month later, or so forth. They can set it up so that so that it has to be majority vote, so forth. They can set it up so that there's, this person who created it, and then two others who have to sign off on everything that person does from here on immediately, and then they can proceed from there. And every iteration of that, the person can also create something that's entirely a dictatorship. And there's positions that people can join knowing it's a dictatorship. And to the extent people are willing to operate along those lines, and some people are, in some cases it is desirable. We don't call it a dictatorship in that case. We call it other things. But to the extent that people want to participate in that, they can do that. And to the extent they don't, well, the person who created that is out of luck. Now, in terms of kicking someone out, the alternative, probably the most common alternative in Pursuance will be, rather than kicking someone out of the project, will be replicating the project, which is one of the big features of Pursuance, is that you build these structures. Here's a template you now have for setting up a march somewhere or investigating a corrupt bank or something like that. And someone can see that, any participant can see that and see the structure of it. Depending on how the Pursuance is set up, in some cases they'll be opaque, and that's not something we can get into another time. But suffice to say, for the most part, these Pursuances will not be high security, won't need to be. The average civic business does not need to be super tightly kept secret from Bank of America's little corporate spies, but you can if you need to be, and many will. Anyway, someone can take a copy of that structure and set it up themselves, and then run it themselves, and then tweak it, change it to be different. So either you can have just different leadership with the same structure. People just think that structure is great, but it's just the leadership is just, they don't want to deal with that person. Or they can take it and tweak it to make it, preferable in structural ways. That's a big feature of this because it means a number of things. It means that people who come into Pursuance, they don't have to sit around figuring out what Pursuances are and how you design a Pursuance and what's the best way to do that. They just look in the data library of Pursuances that have existed and been uploaded, and there'll be templates and notes kind of saying this template, this structure we have found was good in this instance for organizing a mail-in campaign into a congressman here and there, and also dealing with the press on it. Take that as a template, copy it, make it your own, put it in the Pursuance deal, tweak it as you need be, and then that evolved version, if it is an evolved version, if it does seem to, if the iteration you've evolved from the original deal seems to be better, you can notate that, upload it. So it's constantly evolving. You have a constantly evolving individual discrete entities and templates. That's one of the ways in which it evolves. The other ones being, as more people come in, as people better associate with each other, learn who can do what, build trust relationships, etc. So there's several means of evolution, any one of which I think would be pretty awesome. But here they're combined in a way that kind of overlaps and allows, and just solves a lot of the problems that people are going to anticipate when they think about Pursuance. And of course, and at this point, I should note, I know I'm rambling here, but
I love it.
We spend a lot of time, asking and doing some makeshift user testing and talking to a lot of NGOs and nonprofits and small activist groups and reformers around the world, West Africa, Arab world. What is it you want? What do you have right now? What are the problems you're facing? And besides the problems you identified, do you think this is a problem that you may not have thought about? And you agree with that's a problem, et cetera. We've done a lot of question answering. And so at this point, I'm very confident, as I am in all things, that, we are able to, any objection, any concern, any sort of, any reason why someone might not be on board for this, even if they are interested in getting involved in civics, we're generally able to explain in our favor. And that's because we've done a lot of thinking and work on this, including my 4 years in prison, which I had plenty of time to think and work on it, and a great deal of input from a lot of great outfits that have been around for much longer than us. And so I always hasten to add that because any thinking person who's really interested in this is going to have objections, they're going to have concerns, and I just want to make sure that they're aware that to the extent that they have one, it may be addressed online already, and if you can't find it, I'm always available to expound on how great it is. So
fair enough. Relying on the knowledge of the people who came before has been something that we've always done. All the way back to the beginnings of Chronology, when we had the first two videos out, related to that, the message to Scientology and the call to arms, we were telling people to go out in the streets who had never really been the activist types. And we talked to old school protesters to get an idea of what we might be facing against this type of a hostile enemy, and they gave us a list of things, and we turned that into the third video, the code of conduct. And so that was really important, dealing with the old schoolers who already had a lot of this knowledge. So I'm glad to hear that's going on.
Exactly, and that right there is a great example. I'm glad you reminded me. It's a great example of one of those things that one of the many things that one doesn't necessarily think of as the hurdles of everyday activism. When one just thinking about, like, what is activism, what does it entail, blah blah. In that case, it was an environmental organization. I won't name it just in case I don't know. That approached you guys early on, and to find you guys, to find the command center, as it were, of the church of the Chainology campaign. They had to go through a few steps and figure things out. Wasn't that hard, I imagine, but it was some hurdles. Yeah. And so ideally, those kind of like extra efforts, on the path of someone who wants to help, those should be facilitated. Those should be easier, smoother. And to the extent we deal with those seemingly mundane, sometimes hard to kind of, think of little problems, to the extent we create a mechanism by which people can solve not just those that we can anticipate or know of, but those in the future, to the extent they have the tinker toys, as it were, to build and to establish and to grow and recruit, and where those recruited can know going in what they're involved in and have certain rights that are delineated in all respects. We get around a lot of those things, not just the anticipated problems, not just the problems that you and I whine about all the time, me especially, but the problems that will come forward next as these things continue to evolve on both sides. And so that again, this is I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over again, as I often do with Pursuance. It's just different ways of saying the same deal. Is that we're trying to facilitate. We're trying to create something, set in motion something that can be a unified, in a way, like meta superorganism, but not in a way where one person is directing it, and where any one person can compromise it, and any one person can turn into a cult of personality, even me.
So what's the basic timeline here? I mean, we've been, just to say it bluntly, waiting a while for something to do with Pursuance, and the last thing I got to see was just an install of Mattermost. So tell me where we are.
Right. So the last I spoke publicly Pursuance was in January of this year. It was an article I wrote in Counterpunch, where I used to write a column, in which I sort of went over a recent Der Spiegel article, as well as a not so recent NPR piece that had come out across the nation to everyone listening to All Things Considered, both of which were about me and Pursuance, and both of which were to me very chilling, seeing what I've seen. To better convey this, the NPR, before we did our Kickstarter in late or mid 2018, or late 2018, in the run up to that, as I was dealing with the DOJ and dealing with them going after my publisher, going after my editors and employers, subpoenaing people, seizing my money and so forth, while we're navigating all this and still chugging along, bringing on a board of directors, establishing a nonprofit, doing all these things. We were also, of course, trying to explain to the public what it was we were about to build, what it was, why it mattered, why it was worth paying close attention to, and not just half-assed, freelancer attention to, and so forth. And that went pretty well for the most part. Then NPR interviewed me in their studio, and some months later they came out with this All Things Considered broadcast that went out again to the whole country. Most people who probably weren't paying attention, they wouldn't, whatever. But people who, when they hear Pursuance from then on, are going to think of what NPR told them. And what NPR chose to tell them was, to me, remembering quite fully, and having actually been employed, as I have in the last couple of years, writing my life story over and over again for this memoirs, for Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and then the screenplay I'm now doing, having had to go back and look at the coverage and look at how the coverage affected how vulnerable we were, not just me, not just the people and other people whose names are known, but all the volunteers, contributors, and so forth, all the people who ended up getting spied on illegally by the DOJ, as the Washington Times reported when Kevin Gallagher took them to court a couple of years. All the people who were raided in Norway, in England, and all that, whose, again, names are unknown, people whose names I don't even know, who were hit. They were easy to hit, to retaliate against, for doing things that were entirely legal and necessary and helpful and above board and open, because certain elements of the press decided, for whatever reason, sure varying reasons, that it would be a good idea or fun or cute or perhaps profitable or whatever to say things publicly that were not just false, but sometimes insane. So this NPR piece, among other things, you may recall this broadcast. There's also an article up. I encourage people to read it. It's called the web article of this piece was called "An Anarchist Explains How Hackers Could Cause Global Chaos." It was a headline.
Yep.
The broadcast itself compared me and you, frankly, everybody involved, Anonymous and so forth, and my nonprofit, to Russian agents attacking democracy. They attributed things that were done by a character in a show called Mr. Robot that is based more on you than me, I think, because it's a hacker. It's only based on me to the extent that he was a heroin addict and probably had was emotionally volatile, which you're not. That's why you're not fun, because you're not emotionally volatile. You never make a good character out of you. They even had to give your counterpart on House of Cards a ferret, to really humanize him. But,
Guinea pig.
Anyway, guinea pig, right. Yeah. Anyway, the things they did in that, to me, it made me worry again about what we were going to face and how much of it and how little it would matter if once again we were to expose those things, as in FBI, background activity, Jennifer Emick, so forth, background security. A lot of this stuff that's memorized in books by Gabriella Coleman and Parmi Olson, what does it say, the half-assed books. And a lot of articles since then, the things that happened to us behind the scenes, and in some cases which we exposed after they were leaked or hacked and all that, FBI, emails and so forth. It occurred to me that, I don't want to go through another whole several years of this where we're being attacked and we're being set up and we're being framed and softened up. And there's no one I can go to and say, hey, please help us. Or at the very least, please stop taking dirt in our face further. Please correct this. And I realized after that broadcast came out and I started emailing the reporter saying, hey, could you maybe change this? Because you just accused our several thousand volunteers of being a part of a hacker network, which they call it, which has nothing to do whatsoever with Pursuance. I realized, wow, there was nothing about the press having re-embraced me shortly after a few months after my arrest, when we kind of put out the real story about here's what the search warrants were about, here's the companies we exposed, blah blah. There's nothing about that in the National Magazine Awards and all that shit that I got that was going to stop them from doing the same shit again that they had done, that had already threatened all of us, and more importantly, threatened the work we had uncovered and put out there. And then, but whatever, we rolled with it. We had the Kickstarter a few months after that, and we barely made our goal, $48,000, and so now we were able to pay an executive director to oversee all these things, pay some money to programmers to build a really early kind of primitive iteration of it. Expenses to send people out to this conference in Ontario, have Thomas Drake out there and Justin Raddick, and have them again present the ideas behind this. We got that money, and over the next year, I think we made good use of it. We weren't able to produce the actual prototype. That went wrong very quickly. We had we were working with people who, again, they had their own full-time jobs, they have their own constraints, and as always, we're not necessarily getting the full some of the resources that we might have liked to have, given the scope of what we're trying to do and given the difficulties in them. But we did do a lot in terms of figuring out and illustrating and kind of documenting some of the more minute aspects of all this, of building up process democracy and of determining the security aspects, which became more and more important to me as I saw how many of these same factors that were in play back in the bad old days of 2012, how many of them were back in action. When you are creating something that is going to be used by Arab reformers, who, if they get caught, they die, or you're just tortured maybe for a few years, you start to think more and more seriously about, hey, is this going to be enough? And how much harder will the State Department make this than it has to be? And how much harder will Gawker or its successor states, The Intercept and so forth, where they take all the old Gawker people, how much harder are they going to make this? And so by the time early this year, when Der Spiegel put out an article about me claiming I had spent the last couple of years harassing women on Twitter without citing any examples of this, and claiming in the subheadline that I was now spreading conspiracy theories without citing examples of that, I was done. Frankly, I was going through a lot of difficulties in terms of PTSD and stuff that's kind of caught up with me over the years, and I wrote an article for Counterpunch, just sort of making fun of the article, reviewing back to the New York the NPR article, citing some of the articles from some of the military-funded outlets like Radio Free Europe that had come out about many years ago, and just explaining, hey, so my goal for the next year, as I said, was going to be to try to alleviate the situation, to try to convince the press that it's not worth it to do this. And then when that is done, when I feel we are ready, we will revamp Pursuance. We'll get back to work on it. And I'm happy to announce today that that time has come, and that now with me no longer being within the immediate reach of the DOJ, and having, I think, and I'm quite proud of this, quite frankly, because media reform was what I really got into all this for. Before Anonymous and all that, I have made it clear to the press in several countries that I'm not going to tolerate libel that exposes us to criminal malfeasance by the government at all. And that just because you're a reporter or a journalist, as I was when I was dragged into cages by ex-military people in prison for giving in radio interviews, that doesn't mean I can't voice very, very strong opposition to the shit that you guys do in some cases. And so long as I can explain it and you're afraid to respond to it, I'm going to feel justified in making those objections very strong. To the extent that a particular outlet, New York Times, New Yorker, whatever, is willing to, explain or defend any of the things it's done, and there's been quite a few, to an extent that is frankly shocking to me that I've learned in the last couple of years doing this research. To that extent, I'm going to feel worried about that. And so I do feel that having made a few moves in the last 6 months in particular, physically and otherwise, that Pursuance can now proceed along the lines that I envision it as, and it can do so in a way where I'll feel comfortable telling people in Bahrain or Egypt or India or the US, you can use this and you can expect it to be safer, not totally safe, because nothing is, safer and better suited than anything else out there. And so Pursuance is now having been on hiatus for about 9 months now, is now back on course. And so in terms of timelines beyond that, all the timelines I provided, up to this have been wrong for the most part, except for the extent I've said I don't know. So I'd prefer not to do that. I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want to, say things. I do take full responsibility for all the delays, and some of them have been, have been for reasons I just discussed. Some of them had to do with the book, which I've been writing, the memoirs that I signed a deal on when I got out of prison, the memoir manifesto thing. Which has been delayed for some similar reasons, but is now finished. I turned it in, this final draft. I turned in the original draft 2 years ago. This final draft has been turned in.
That's a long edit.
It's been a real, as with many things, it's been a real. Oh, you and I did a book back in the day. You remember?
We tried.
You remember something?
We tried. Yeah, it was fun.
We got some of the money at least from Amazon.
Yeah, I love that
and
story.
Spent that money. Hell yeah. Anyway, so that is now done, and Pursuance was always coupled. The plan was always that Pursuance would launch after the book comes out, because the book was necessary not just as a book, just as a means of me being able to support myself and continue to do this stuff, but also to neutralize some of those press elements and police elements that are out there that require certain factors in play to be able to act as they want to, as well as to explain better. Here's why Pursuance is so needed. Here are the problems. Here are the specifics of these problems. Here are the problems that are relevant to activism itself. Here are the broader problems. Here's the solution. Here's the examples of the solution, the real examples of how we solve things that have not perhaps been fully conveyed by us in some cases, or the press, because for whatever reason. Here is the scope of how hopeful this kind of activism is, and here is the thinking that has gone into this solution, and here is the extent to which you yourself as a citizen participates in this, will be able to inform that solution further. And so that's what the book will do, along with creating more opportunities for people to get involved, volunteer. I mean, remember our first lead developer, he got in touch with me after seeing a Wired article that came out that accurately explained when I got out of prison. Barrett Brown's back. He's still crazy. He's going to go after this, this, and this. Here's what he's building. Here's what kind of makes sense. Here's the pitfalls it might face. Blah blah. That's how we attract people. That's how we bring in informed participants, by accurate representations in the public. One of the other factors that has kind of made things more difficult is that, as you know, my Twitter account and the Twitter account of Pursuance itself have both been removed from Twitter over the last year and a half. And there's some articles about that by David Gilmour over on Daily Dot, Barrett Brown Twitter, blah, blah. And Facebook more recently. My Facebook is also taken down. So I've lost a lot of the tools that I've historically used, even in the last couple of years, to organize these kind of campaigns, crowdsourced investigation, crowdsourced civics. And so that was big part of the picture on how we spread Pursuance. We'll get around these things. And I feel that when my book comes out, and my amorphous status solidifies again, it turns out, oh, wait, you can't actually take away his Twitter. He does have some presence here. I think I'll get those back, or at least Pursuance will. So again, that's one of the, and there's all kinds of other things I could whine about in terms of here's the problem, here's why it's not my fault and all that. But the main thing is because it has been my fault. I'm a notorious drug addict, substance abuser, and lazy person. And getting out of prison, was tougher than being in prison for me. And the last couple of years, just the things I've come across have been very disconcerting. And we'll just leave it at that. And I took methamphetamines for about a year and a half, and I'm glad I did it because really when I was put on the methamphetamines, I really wreaked havoc on a lot of these old opponents of ours, and elements of the press, police agencies, and all that. I really just outdid myself in terms of just bothering them, just making it claim that, like, look, you don't want to start an illicit conflict with me because I'm like a rabid dog who will be biting your leg, and that may make me look bad. But I'm used to looking bad.
Well, I just want to make it clear to the audience that in order to get back at your various enemies out there and have the energy to do so, do not take the Barrett Brown School of Science and do methamphetamines. We are not professing.
If like me, you're willing to then go to rehab, as I did a few months ago, because you realize, okay, I'm done now. My work here is done. I've terrorized everybody. Everyone's going to leave us alone. They're not going to be helping the police come after activists for donating to my legal fund. That's over. Then go to rehab and then go leave the country. If you want to take those steps, which was, kind of my plan the whole time, then you should do it. Take all the amphetamines you need to, if you're in my situation.
I am not endorsing that. I am definitely.
But of course you're not. You're fine.
But you know me, I'm a teetotaler.
I know. Indeed. Killed me. But anyway, so that is best I can summarize. It's a very Baroque situation as usual, and so that's what the situation has been. And one of the reasons I haven't put out a announcement or updated in Pursuance in quite a while is because I didn't know what to say yet, because things were still in flux. And now that things have settled down, now I'm able to finally kind of tell people, like, hey, here's that thing you've been waiting for. Sorry, it's coming. Here's the deal. Mea culpa. And also, fuck you, because, all those things at once.
So there was a hell of a lot there, and I'm getting asked, why I'm not talking as much, and it's because Barrett can talk for hours, and it's great. One of the best reasons to have Barrett on your show, anyone else out there, is you don't have to prepare. Just give him a question and then sit back. It's amazing. But no, a couple of the things you brought up there that are really important are you brought up this idea that when the powers that be, the evils in control of everything, the FBI's, the DOJs of the world.
Control is too strong of a word.
Sure, but when the people who believe they are in control would like to continue holding on to that fallacy, you don't have a higher authority, if you will, to reach out to and say, hey, could something be done about this? Because you can't ask them. It's like telling your bully to stop punching you. That's just going to encourage him to keep punching you. So so at that point, we need other structures. And activism is one of those structures. So for me, Pursuance is definitely going to be heading down that direction, and I'm hoping it does what I want. I have so many questions about the tools that I know aren't even written yet, but your general idea, like you had talked about anyone being able to launch one, does that mean that your goal is still a somehow centralized system so you get those libraries, or are we getting open source that we can run on our own servers, or what are we getting out of this?
So the answer to that is yes, and with the proviso, as usual, that whenever we're talking about the specific mechanics, technical mechanics, you know me very well. You've fixed
Yes.
my computer a number of times, and so you know that the specifics of that are best referred to documentation that we have, some of which is still subject to change out there, some of which is not, and some of which is not yet published yet. But the answer is yes, it will always be decentralized. So these libraries I'm talking about, for instance, so on a Pursuance, on a particular server of Process Democracy, like think of it this way: Process Democracy is the mechanism that I have coined the term for this procedure that I define in certain ways, and which can be run on a pad of paper, if in a pen, and mail if need be, but which is best run for the most part, on a server or a series of servers, etc., online. And Pursuance itself that we curate, in which we have a mechanism for deciding, who gets in, and basically anybody who applies gets in, unless their answer to our question is just terrible. That barrier is not intended to be the end all and be all. It's just intended to ensure that we don't have whatever terrible things. David Icke, who knows? That in that instance, yes. So there will be a centralized server, for the data library and so forth. To the extent that a particular pursuance, or that a particular iteration of a pursuance, a structure, I should probably think of another word for the actual pursuance. So, to the extent that is made accessible to it. So in some cases, but I think probably very few, it will be proper and necessary, dutiful to not make the structure of the pursuance available in any way, shape, or form. That'll generally be doing high-end operations, assessing things that bite back, like Deutsche Bank or Russia or any country at all, frankly, unfortunately. But for the most part, yes, there will be, generally the accepted custom will be to make your structured pursuance available to others in the pursuance, in the universe established there. But anyone can take the same Process Democracy framework, and the software that runs it, and run it on their own server. Now, that leaves open a lot of questions. I'll set that aside unless anyone wants to ask them in particular. But I can assure you that the implications of that are something we have thought through quite a bit, as with much else here, and hopefully pretty much all of it. So if anybody does have any questions along those lines of what does this mean, that this mean Nazis can run their own server, we have some answers to that. And sometimes the answers are, unfortunately, that could be the case, or that's one of the problems that we run into when we invent anything or create anything. But in many cases, I'm happy to say, we do have some pretty hopeful answers as to those kinds of problems that do come up whenever you have a platform, whenever you have whenever you bring something out in the arms race, that's going on internationally and among nations, to lie and to expose and to tell the truth and to obfuscate.
Anonymous and all of those fun tactics that were come up with by others and me and everyone kind of early on have been used for great things and terrible things. The issue here is always that if you give it more structure than an idea that is put out into the world, then by its very nature you are giving it a surface area for attack. Be it a single person, a single server, a single programmer, whatever it might be. So you have to open these things up. You have to allow anyone to take them. Your general hope with this type of stuff, at least in my case, has always been, when we put ideas out there that help people actually organize and organize stronger and better, and especially more anonymously like we did early on, we hoped and prayed that more people were good people than bad people. And so when you put a set of tools out there, more often than not, it will be used for good. So in the end, the greater good is served. You can't do anything in the more general sense about the fact that you've put out an idea and the bad guys have now decided to use that idea. The only thing you can do is, like the current fun that is being done attacking QAnon, where a bunch of people like Kurt Tanner, whose name I now know how to actually pronounce, good old Aubrey there, are starting to fight against people who are using anonymous as tactics, or generally just kind of piggybacking on the name in a way that we don't like because they are not anonymous. they're being attacked. And this goes back to the old adage of anonymous being anonymous' worst enemy. In Pursuance, I would imagine that there will be a day when the Nazis throw up a version of it, and another Pursuance pops up, literally to fight that Pursuance. Like, we had that happen with all of our old tactics, where the bad guys would take our tactics and attempt to use them, and then we would use those same tactics against them. So that's how I would see this going. I mean, is that your basic experience?
And I agree with that assessment, and I would say that I take it probably a more pessimistic view than you do, even as much as you expressed, the reasonable pessimism there.
That was my decade-old pessimism speaking. I now have lost almost all faith in humanity, so
right. Gotcha.
I'm there with you now.
Gotcha. Right. So in this instance, here's the thing. Unlike inventing like a weapon or a kind of submarine or a submarine with weapons on it or sharks that shoot bees out of their mouth, to take a little classic early series Simpsons, which you don't seem to recognize because you don't enjoy having fun. We're producing something here that has it's a format that does have natural appeal and thus will be more utilized, we can expect in advance, without being hopeful, which neither of us are. In a way I think I can articulate, like, so back in the 90s especially, and up until today, AM radio has been the province of conservatives. There's very few exceptions. You remember Air America Radio came out around the 2004 election, all that wasn't successful because, for whatever reason, when we get into it here, certain kinds of people prefer certain kinds of formats. Some people like reading. Some people like to have blog posts with hyperlinks, like proving the things that are being said. Some people like their presidents to tweet stuff out that's nonsense over and over again. So, Biden, for instance, as was pointed out by Trump Jr. or Trump or somebody who was citing some kind of evidence of the electoral fraud, Biden has far fewer followers than Trump, but he is the president now. We're about to be. So that's a great lesson as to, there are differences in format such that if we are conscious of these, we can expect to put out something with the certainty, which we rarely have, the certainty that this is going to be, on the whole, better utilized and more utilized by our side, open society people. In this instance, I think it's especially true because it doesn't take that many people to think up a lie. It does oftentimes take a bunch of people to figure out the truth. Crowdsourced research, which is one of the things that I've spent a lot of time on, of course, it is a collaborative effort. And the things we're countering generally aren't. The things we're countering, although there's lots of people involved, often just as with most things, we're generally countering black box apparatuses like Palantir, Mantech, the CIA, GCHQ, shit that we see glimpses of whenever someone like Snowden comes along and leaks some stuff, or someone hacks deals here or there, or gets declassified. And so what we're doing is we have a situation in which the other side has all these advantages, and most of the operations are being done from these very tightly wound apparatuses. Of course, you have QAnon people. You do have distributed, crowdsourced nonsense. And that's the case. That's a fact. But I do think that, given that QAnon itself almost certainly came from one of these black boxes. I haven't followed it as closely as some of you guys have, but I do know that's has been the thinking for a while, that it was conceived and then operated or whatever, or taken over or whatever, some combination thereof.
It was taken over very quickly by those types, but initially it was just two people on 4chan, Paul Ferber and Kevin Rogers, trying to sell t-shirts.
Another lesson. Another lesson, kind of maybe contradictory to my lesson here, but still.
But it went very quickly. I mean, it was weeks later before it was off on YouTube, and the conspiracy nuts were starting to move, and then higher production values started coming behind it, if you will. And then you noticed, the change. But early on, it was literally a ploy to sell T-shirts from one of those print-on-demand T-shirt shops from a couple of guys on 4chan. Like, it was an absolute joke, and people
as you know, more than Betty than anyone else, a couple of guys on 4chan can end up holding a great deal of power.
Yeah.
Because you were once one of them. And so that's a great lesson right there. And so QAnon's kind of being an exception almost, but also an important part of the example, I suppose, in another way. I've always felt, I think for the last 9 years since the Palantir incident, Team Themis, we first started to get a glimpse at these intelligence contracting firms and how they work with the FBI and GCHQ and so forth, and what that entails. We've always been up against a certain kind of apparatus for the most part. And to the extent we've been up against these more crowdsourced apparatuses, it has generally been with the active participation, encouragement, pushing, supplying by the FBI or by Palantir and so forth. We've always found those connections in the end, long after we suspected they were there.
Yeah.
And so it's a situation in which they have these advantages. They're black boxes. We don't have the things we should have. And putting them out there, the scales will tip on our favor, even to the extent that there's a great deal of use of it by people who can't really make use of it that well on the other side. People who aren't people who aren't trying to find the truth and collaborate to do so. And people who already have advantages in the Mercer family and Palantir and so forth. And so that's why, and this is the reason I go on about this so much is because it's one of the big concerns, I had for a long time, a lot of us had, was that, how can we expect this to be any better in terms of humanity's fate than the internet or Facebook or 1,000 other things. And in this case, I do think that we can, and I'm always happy to have other issues brought up because we do want to address them and think about them. But I do think from what we've been able to examine and hear and kind of analyze that this will be a net positive for the open society.
That is the most optimistic thing I've ever heard you say. So I would like to address one key thing here. You have called me not fun now 3 times during this, and I would like to.
You don't play video games. You don't drink.
Okay, all I do is play video games. I don't know what you're talking about. That's been like the last.
What's your Steam code then, or PS code then?
On Steam, I'm PFF Gregg. If anyone wants to send the old connection, that is my old clan from the Counter-Strike days, way back when. I quit back on 1.6. But no, when you knew me, I wasn't gaming because I was too busy doing activism and I had no time. But no, the thing that I think really spoiled you on me having fun is the last, the 3 times we really had the most fun, I would say.
Oh, yeah, working on that damn book proposal. Yeah.
Working on the book proposal or spending the couple times we got to hang out in, bars with me, you, and Michael Hastings. You guys got, smashed, and I'm sitting there completely not drinking, just drinking water and soda the whole time.
We call that not fun in the Western world.
Yeah. Well,
so, you're explaining it. You're definitely explaining the dynamics. That does not refute what I'm saying. You're kind of...
I was having fun. I don't know about you.
Good. I'm glad you're having fun, right? So were we.
Yeah. So, that's another one of those pieces of this puzzle that I think I want to see addressed a lot more by, hopefully, a Pursuance. What happened?
Did you have more fun?
No. What happened with Michael Hastings? Sure, if someone wants to put up a Pursuance to try and figure out how to make me have some fun out there in the world, I'd love it because I need a little more of that. But no.
Regarding Michael Hastings, I'll just say this. You will love the last 3 or 4 pages of the book because it is a verbatim in an email. You'll love the last 3 or 4 pages of the book. A bunch of things. I've waited a long time on this to address this, in any really meaningful way publicly. I wanted to get my ducks in a row, and now I have. And in this case, it's less of a question of what happened, but what happened afterwards, and what didn't happen, and what should have happened. This was a journalist who died, and the way that his work and himself, and I'll be the first to say this, a journalist or an activist. Our lives are expendable. They absolutely are expendable. There is nothing about any of us that should be memorialized and fetishized and all that the way that Assange has been subject to, no doubt, against his will for the last 10 years. We are here to serve and to fight and to die. Michael Hastings, his life, how he's regarded, all that stuff is meaningless. What's meaningful is the work he did that was important, and the things he was working on, and the extent to which that was essentially wasted, was cut off from any potential further amplification and use. That was not something that anyone on the other side could do. The only people who could do that was the working press in this country, or the U.S., still used to being in England, who failed in every measure possible to evaluate his work, who he was, and instead gave in to their basest impulses in a way that, and I'll tell you this. Over the last year and a half, up until about 3 or 4 months ago, I was planning on committing suicide. And one of the few reasons why I didn't was because I knew what my obituaries would look like, because I've seen Hastings. And I knew that nothing would be gained from that. There would be nothing gained. And this is one of the things that's affected me a great deal. And that's why it took me so long to really finish this last chapter of the book, is because it goes into these things. And unlike everything else, being in prison, having my mom charged, so forth, being in the SHU, being dragged to windshields, none of those things really did anything to me. I'm fine with those things. But just the base character of our most important institutions, which is journalism, the base character of those who have just slid into that over the years, and the helplessness that I see I now have in the face of that, to force people to examine it or just get them to stop doing it, was to me terrifying. And again, like I said earlier, I'm glad I took my amphetamines for a year and a half. I'm glad I terrorized Adrian Shen and John Cook and Glenn Greenwald, because the FBI can do whatever, GCHQ can do whatever, but it's really our colleagues, or my former colleagues in the press, that get to decide what the meaning of it is. And they have not made the right decisions, I think, ever in our lifetimes.
So we hung out with Michael. We talked to him a lot. One of my kind of oddly almost morbid things that I own, that I have here in my house, is I still haven't been able to take his Rolling Stone business card out of my wallet. I still keep it there just as a reminder of how bad things went there, and how little we truly know about what really happened at the end. But for everyone who doesn't know, as there's going to be people who watch this who have no idea what we're talking about, Michael Hastings was a journalist. He was an investigative journalist, a very good investigative journalist. His work got the wrong people out of places they shouldn't have been. Got McChrystal removed from the Middle East, and just many other things. His work was important, and it was always punching up. He was going after people who were in positions of power and shouldn't be, who were abusing those positions of power. And in the end, I do truly believe that he was killed for his reporting. I don't believe the accident. I don't believe the stories of him being drunk and having, some kind of a car crash. I don't believe the stories that maybe the car itself had some kind of a malfunction. I believe that his car was actually, hacked in some way. And what's funny about that belief is, at first you say that to people, like right afterward, like literally the day it happened, and they tell you you're insane. And then that week on national TV, General Alexander, former head of the NSA, goes live on TV, and when asked that exact question, says, "Oh no, yeah, we can do that. Like the NSA's had that technology for a decade." Like, yeah, I mean, it might have happened. I don't know. But, it goes from an insane theory that just his friends are now passing around in some kind of almost a way to deal with the grief, that it becomes, a theory that needs to be investigated, and never was. And that night that it happened, I was on the phone that night with the people at Rolling Stone, director, his coworkers. Like, we got on a phone call with like 5 of us with what little information we knew from the day before and that day, because I don't know, I don't remember our conversations right around that time, but I was on the phone with him the night before, and it was crazy, because there was definitely no sign the night before that he was doing that. We were talking about specifically his next piece and the big thing he was working on, and when he was going to come out to the East Coast again so we could meet up and all that fun stuff. And then the next day he's gone, and the media's reporting on it was basically about this journalist who it was sad that passed away in in a way, but not in a super mysterious way that maybe he was reporting on something the powers that be think he shouldn't have. Just, it sucks. That maybe it was suicide by car, maybe it blew up, who knows. No, I think he was killed, personally.
And whether or not he was, and I will say that if I were in charge of whatever, let's say Booz Allen Hamilton, or whatever, and I was, tasked with dealing with those journalists or whistleblowers who, of course, as we know, have been a major concern of many governments for 15 years now, and I was had to figure out which person does it make the most sense for us to get rid of. Who, based on their past performance last few years, can we project over the next 10 years will cause much more trouble to the national security apparatus that we all believe in for some reason. I would kill Hastings immediately.
And I think
because he was the best. And so, but I don't hold a position on that. And I'll put it this way. When it happened, I was agnostic, remained agnostic for a few years. I have since had back-channel conversations, as I'm sure you have. And I know I've talked about it a bit. That makes me believe that it's definitely worth investigating, and I do think it's more likely than not. And what kills me is that it's the fact that I should feel uncomfortable saying that.
Yeah.
Knowing how it weakens my position, knowing how this kind of thing is dealt with by my ex-colleagues who have no fucking idea about any of this stuff, have zero idea except for they've read in James Bond movies, and because they've seen in James Bond movies, think it's thus fantastical, and who are not worth killing. Which is the meanest thing I can say about them. The fact that they get to decide ultimately, whether or not anything gets looked into, and can even punish those of us who want to look into it, who think it's our duty when a journalist dies under unusual circumstances, that it should be looked into in a way based on the evidence, which has to be picked up first, can't be discarded, can't be, it's not what happened in this case. There's a great deal of evidence that came out months later from the FBI and so forth that contradicts the original narrative that became the permanent narrative.
Of course,
being the media narrative, it's despicable and it's unfortunate. And again, the reason it's not because Michael Hastings needs to be sainted and because we need to, because his life had special meaning. It doesn't. It's because he serves a function, and the function is not a small one. It is news and media information that determines who gets to be president, who gets to be considered president, who gets to give advice that is taken seriously by vast apparatus in the United States and elsewhere. Which countries can be invaded, which countries can't, who can die in Yemen, how many children can be, how many weapons can we sell to Saudis. These are no small matters. There have been more articles about me taking a bath on webcam during the Zeta thing as a joke in order to show that I wasn't being executed by the Zetas, as much the press said I would be, than there are about Hastings and his coverage of things. There's not a single article out there, but the fact that a few months before he died, he was on the Young Turks, and he talked about having been under surveillance and having been told this by his friend in Special Forces. And there's not one article about the fact that, contrary to the FBI's original claim that they had no interest in him and no files on him, which they later reneged upon a few months later, and then they did show they had one couple documents with some weird wording on them. My gag order hearing, in which I was legally required not to talk about my case or anything involving it, like Palantir and things I investigated as a journalist for a year and a half, Michael Hastings is mentioned in there, and they admit to having notes on him. He was all of my emails. He was involved in the Tunisia thing. The day after, you brought me in the Tunisia thing, I was already in touch with Hastings via my Gmail account. Yep. It was under discovery. He was a member of Project PM early on. Project PM was designated a criminal organization by the DOJ. We all know the DOJ investigated, tried to identify every single person who contributed to my wiki, my journalistic wiki, and every single person who donated to my legal fund. They did that illegally, and then were sued for it later on. So the idea that Hastings, the guy who was already on their radar, obviously, and already a target of any number of interests around the world, would not have been someone the FBI had files on when they had files on every single other person, including 17-year-olds in Norway who wrote for my wiki or was in a chat room. is not just absurd, it is something that, to the extent that it is voiced or maintained, the person maintaining that should have their face spat upon and beaten. I just can't even tell you how worse it's been. I prefer the FBI to my former colleagues.
You know, I spent the last two conversations me and him had went similar to the last conversation the three of us had together. You know, those last two conversations me and him had the day before and 3 days before his passing. He joked with me as he read some of the death threats he was getting from military and former military about his articles he had written that had gotten people removed from the field of battle. And he thought it was both scary and funny. And of course, you know,
as things often are.
Yeah, you usually laugh in the face of fear, whether you're actually being strong or not. It just, you know, it's a natural reaction to these things.
If things are funny, they're funny. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you got to find the humor somewhere. But one of the stories I've told a few people that you might remember is me, you, and Michael in New York, and we're at a bar, and you do a very deft move of changing the focus from you, because at this point it's probably 8 months, 9 months before you're actually about to get raided and be in serious trouble, but you're already very clearly, you know, not giving a fuck about whether it's coming or not.
I had been informed by the FBI informants that I was going to prison, so I already knew the charges hadn't been figured out yet. Yeah.
So I'm sitting there yelling at you to slow it down a bit because you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life, and just to not to stop what you're doing, but like just know that you're on your way to prison here, and we'd like to not lose a friend, so do what you can to minimize your exposure. And you're telling me basically, in the nicest terms among friends who talk to each other like this, to fuck off with that. And that you aren't slowing down at all. And you quickly, I mean, I'm like 3 sentences in on you, say, well, this guy's just going to get himself killed. I'm only going to prison. And we spend the next 10 minutes yelling at Michael about the fact that he's getting, you know, 3 and 4 death threats a day from ex-military. And, you know, within a year and a half in my life, you're in prison and he's dead. And it's one of those moments.
You've always given good advice. No one's ever accused you of not giving good advice. It's just that you're not that fun.
Yeah, you know, like, I mean, it's one of those things where you look back on different times in life when you were right about something, and sometimes you're like, well, thank God I was right about that, you know, and this is one of those I really wish I was wrong. A lot, you know, I think about it a lot.
And this is worth mentioning here, just into the greater context. You know, this is all sad shit in a way, but, you know, in a way, World War II, in which both my grandfathers were bombers, you know, and so forth, you know, you never heard of them because they were among the millions and millions of people who voluntarily went and risked their lives to fight fascism. It was standard to expect you might die or friends might die. It was standard. No one called you a hero for it. No one said you're brave and all that. There were no articles about every single person like there have been for me and you, particularly me as a martyr, as I was when I went to prison. It was just basic shit as a human, as a citizen. And it really does alarm me the extent to which people come to me and say, basically, thank you for your service.
Yeah.
You know, which they do. I've had military guys say that to me. Because, you know, I mean, really, I've gone through very little compared to what someone in World War I, well, World War is a bad example because it was meaningless, but let's say World War II.
Yeah.
Well, the average World War II went through. And it's just, one of the main things to be done, aside from frameworks, aside from learning lessons about tactics and so forth, what needs to be done is there needs to be a very self-confident, self-assertive, perhaps even bullying movement to get people to accept that self-sacrifice may absolutely 100% will be necessary, and that in the absence of a rule of law, in the absence of institutions that work and are fair and are decent and can justify themselves based on even their own reasoning, what happens is you have something along the lines of chivalry or feudalism. You have networks, trust networks, which are fine things to have. You have adventurers. You have a heroic age. A heroic age sounds fun. It sounds really cool, but it is not the ideal thing. And it is what I've been preparing for and what you've been preparing for. I mean, it is a time in which we have adventurers and people who strike out against, but it is not ideal by any means. And so as much as I enjoy it, as much as I enjoy being a Homeric hero, not a hero in the positive American bullshit sense, like you save people on a plane, but the trickster Odysseus, guns through peril, whatever. You know, that's just not ideal. It's not.
And when you say rule of
Now,
law,
I'm happy with it.
like rule of law, you're not talking about
I've
like
benefited from all of
laws.
this. I've made so much. The money I've made in the last 10 years, what little there's been, and the status I've gained has all been on the backs of the public, who have been the true victims of all the things that I'm complaining about. I came out of this smelling like a rose. It is the public in the U.S. and in Yemen and in every other country in the world who would have better benefited from a more open and less corrupt, less insane, fascist, authoritarian world than otherwise. They're the ones who have suffered due to the sins of our opponents in different spheres. And so I try to reiterate that because there's a certain kind of person who finds that difficult to understand. They can't imagine why anyone can object to injustice unless it's because they themselves are whining about it. And again, the reason, if it seems like a weird thing to bring up, it's because I'm thinking very clearly of a number of our colleagues in the press. I've become more neurotic in the last couple of years, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
I was already pretty neurotic, but always fun.
Well, I want to kind of clear, when you say rule of law, you're not talking about, the general sense of there are laws and the people have to deal with it. You're talking about the academic sense.
Ideal.
The ideal that
I'm an anarchist. I'm an anarchist who longs for a republic. Look, I'm an anarchist because I have so little faith in the ability of most human beings at this point in time, and probably in all time before us, to maintain the ideals that they are so ready to assume that they practice. And so I'm a conservative anarchist. I'm an anarchist not out of utopianism, but out of pessimism. And out of experience, increasingly. And so, to me, the rule of law is a beautiful idea. Government is a beautiful idea. And the English government, another time we could talk about England, just kind of how it makes you feel when you see these institutions compared to the ones we're used to. We're both from the Dallas area. We're both from Texas originally. And you've been around, you've seen the other iterations of poor governance. It's just, you can, anyway. There's a difference between professing something and just everyone, papering over something as we did for the last 20 years before, the Trump thing kind of knocked some sense into people and made them realize that we can't just saying, oh, we're a unified America. We're, the Obama speech in 2004, so, we worship an awesome God in the blue states and we're free to think our minds in red states. Bullshit. None of that was true. We are a divided nation and we should be. Europe was divided in 1938, and it should have been. There are battle lines. They don't happen to coincide with national borders at this point, but hopefully someday they will. Hopefully there'll be a civil war.
Very rarely have they. I mean, look at Libya as a fine example of a set of borders that don't actually work and don't actually maintain any level of peace. In fact, they inflict damage on the people just by where they exist. Our national borders have always been a bit of a problem, but let's shift.
Not the national borders. It's the ethos, which reminds us again how important ethos is and how easy it is to establish an ethos. But our ethos of American exceptionalism and just the narrative that has been allowed to exist, even after it's been nullified and contradicted over and over again over the last 4 or 5 decades, that is such an act of violence to allow that ethos. Contrary to all actual fact, contrary to the situation globally and domestically, that has been the greatest act of violence perpetuated in our lifetimes, even greater than the Arab genocide that our country's perpetuated since I was in 3rd grade and you were probably 6th, 7th grade or whatever, how you're older than me. It is, and I say that again, and it may sound like I'm getting kind of crankish because I'm going to have these weird new emphases that I keep reiterating in strange ways. But the reason for it, I hope this will be better illustrated with the book, which will be coming out in a few months, finally. I hope you'll be better able to understand why I'm so freaked out and why I'm so focused on what seem to be kind of, obvious things that maybe need to be repeated. So I just say that as sort of a, I've been in Britain a week, but I'm trying to do the whole, apologizing in advance thing so that no one can criticize me.
So over here in America, where you have so wonderfully left me, we have Nazis in the streets in every major city, and you're now over there having fun with all the Brexiters. So it's not like you've completely left this level of insanity behind.
I'm loyal to the Queen. I'll tell you that.
As loyal as Australia? As loyal as Canada?
England, fuck Australia. England, here's the great thing about England. And again, I've been, I've had ties with England to an unusual extent for 12 years. Started writing for The Guardian in 2009, so forth. And even before that, I used to write for Star Magazine, which, when it was like 2003, when I was like 20, me and my friend Caleb, who you've met,
Yep.
we both were reporters for Star, the tabloid, and dealt with British intellectuals. So I've dealt with a lot of Brits over the years, and I've come to admire them in certain ways. And the polity itself, when you come over here and you meet like a guy upstairs who's Scottish, and just your random neighbor, just a random guy, and you start talking about politics, and he is totally cognizant of things that in the U.S. you have to like go on IRC chats to find people who are cognizant of these things. And you realize that a good 34% of this country is on a high level of awareness and ability to articulate their views, which tend to be open society, versus like maybe 20% in the U.S. You start to realize, boy, sure, I'm glad I left Gregg Housh back in the U.S. and came here to England. Fuck Gregg Housh. Lack of fun. I know, really, there's a lot of potential here is what I'm saying. Seriously, there is a great deal of stuff, of activity here. And some of the people like Frankie Boyle, who's been very helpful to me over the last couple of years and who I've been talking to off and on. And some of these other people I've just become cognizant of, some of these groups like Extinction Rebellion, George Monbiot, they have platforms here. They have things going on the BBC and on Channel 4 and so forth that you would never see in the U.S. And that is, to me, just one more reason why I'm glad that I left you back in the U.S. and I'm now in the U.K. You can join us anytime you'd like to. You just all you got to do is sell that little house in Boston, and get the hell out of there, take your family over to England, and sign up for the National Health like I did.
How am I supposed to sell my landlord's house?
You steal it from your landlord. You hack his whatever. You do the same thing when I was in prison. It's like, hey, can you hack this for me? Just do that. Do that hacking thing.
I have as much money as I has always had. None. You are, in fact,
no money myself.
I think you are, of anyone who is not related to me, the person I have spent the most money on in my entire life. Two of the computers that the government stole from you during various raids and whatnot, I had purchased. And so I felt like I was being stolen from as well. It was horrible. I will say, I loved your mom. I mean, I loved all the time we got to spend down in Dallas. One of the things I've told people is I love going down there and actually staying in her guest room there because it's nicer than like my house.
It really is. Yeah.
It's
and yeah,
she is a wonderful person. Yeah,
and you like the cowhide bar stools the living room is great too, and the Western cowpoke art.
Yeah, no, she doesn't just live in Texas. She like is that Texas mother.
She is the Texas mother. Yes.
Yeah. So you have a book coming. You've been working on this for quite a while. Originally, we started on one long ago that didn't end up going anywhere, and then
there are parts of that book in this book. There's a few sections here and there. Not too many, because Dan would have noticed them, our agent. But,
right.
But there's some, yes. But the book proposal I finished the last 6 months before I got out of prison. So this book started writing it in prison, and it's finally been completed and sent in. And again, as I said, here's something else. This is one more of the errands I have to run on this. I had this whole little thing I'm executing here with this book and elsewhere, in which I have chosen to further fortify my position vis-a-vis the U.S. government, the press, by putting out some information about my prosecutor, Candida Heath, the same one who presided over this cover-up over Michael Hastings and his files, someone who I resent quite a bit. Aside from being a prosecutor who came after me and my mother, and who put me under the gag order for writing a anti-government article for The Guardian, in her words, so forth. We were approached a few months ago by an individual in Dallas, a black individual, who had several very bizarre encounters with Candida Heath and her husband, and a third person who I won't mention here because it's not a public figure, and who made some claims that we saw and we didn't really follow up on, and then followed them up with some links to some things, and then a video. Video was being sold on Amazon.com, our old book publisher, by digital download. It turns out that Candida Heath, former U.S. Assistant USDA for the Northern District of Texas, and current senior counsel for the DOJ's Internet Evidence Division, which is to say that she is in control of vast amounts of the evidence that is used in DOJ cases, and is also involved very closely, as we've seen in documents recently, in some national security-related cases involving Russian hackers. Has a great deal of blackmailable material out on her that we now have because we were given it to her by one of her victims. It turns out that this Candida Heath, this longtime DOJ stalwart, who tried to get me to, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, tried to get me to plead to a linking charge for copying and pasting a link to information that was stolen from Stratford in a way that would, had I pled to it, which I didn't, thank God, would have allowed the DOJ to go after anybody, journalists, researchers, whatever, for copying and pasting links in the future, which would have been vastly disastrous, as the EFF and other organizations around the world pointed out back then. Turns out she is into secretly filming herself having sex with black men without their consent. And one of those victims of hers, who also made some other allegations I won't go into because I can't prove them, whereas I can prove this one, came forward with this stuff, and then his Twitter account was deleted after he came forward with it. Same time my Facebook account was deleted. Long story short, we have a 25-minute video that she produced. She was involved in producing, and that they was being sold under a different name. She goes by the Queen of Spades in the pornography world. Spades, for those who aren't unfamiliar, is a archaic racist term for blacks.
That is quite possibly the worst time for him to lock up. But if you're still there, Barrett, you have completely frozen and we have lost you. I do not know if you are going to pop back here or not, but yeah, so I can continue some of that thought. Some of that thought is that this person in positions of power over many cases, this person is doing things that are illegal, of course, such as filming herself having sex with people against, their will. They did not know that they were being filmed, and then that it was getting sold. So now I'm there twice because, of course, I am. So we've lost Barrett, and we're going to wait and see if he signs back in or not. Yeah, let's do this right here. Yay, technical difficulties. Now you're not getting that fun thing. So the deal here is not that there's any kink shaming going on, that this woman did any kind of pornography. We don't care about that. I mean, do whatever you want. But the idea that she was filming people who did not want to be filmed, did not know they were being filmed, and then selling it, puts her in a blackmailable position to anyone, foreign governments, just anyone. And when she's handling evidence in large federal cases, it's just a bad place to put us, to put the people, to put anyone who she's working on a case against or for, who knows. And so that's kind of where he was going with that, I believe, before we lost him. I am going over here. And just, texting Barrett there to let him know that we've lost him. One thing I will say, just in case we don't get him back, is we are definitely going to have Barrett back. When the book comes out, when Pursuance is a little farther along and he's got updates, that's going to be, very important to us, as I think the ideas behind Pursuance and where it's really heading are where we need to go. We need activism to be easier in this world. We need the tools that people use to do this to be more democratized. And we very clearly need a lot of the just sort of built-in knowledge of people who have done this type of organizing for years to turn into real tools and real documentation instead of just only being in their heads. And so the big reason I brought Barrett on tonight was to really kind of get people to understand, what he's talking about there with Pursuance and where it's heading, and what we're going to do with it in the future. I'm definitely going to be a user. I'm hoping, open source. I'm hoping my own servers. There's a lot of programming to do before he gets anywhere near that. I was hoping to get a little bit of a timeline out of it, but obviously we didn't get there before we lost connection to England. So, yay, being that far away from each other. I think what we're going to do here is probably talk for another couple minutes and see if he shows back up. And he is now unable to connect to the internet at all, it would seem. So Zoom is down for him. So, yeah. Let me do this here. So, yeah. So, the go forward is get a lot more stuff done. Don't go into this with fear. Me and him have both seen jail time. Me more for criminal activities, but it led me to my activism, and it led me to an utter lack of fear while doing the activism. And maybe that's a little dumb on my part. My sense of self-preservation is a little lower than it should be, but know that doing activism and really getting out there is the right move. And I hope that that pessimism of mine he was talking about, that I believe putting the tools out there is going to lead to more good action than bad action, it holds up. When tools like this get put out in the world, you get a real sense by just who uses them of how well we're doing. When we put all the anonymous stuff out in the world early on, it had already been sort of sitting there with groups that referred to themselves as the Internet Hate Machine and other such monikers as they were trolling and doing all their other ops that I honestly took part in and enjoyed. But when we started growing and we went from, the couple hundred people who had done it before to the 10,000 people who showed up for Chinology, we were throwing a lot of interesting ideas out there into the world of how to organize, how to do it in ways where you couldn't be shut down. And when you put that out into the world, you're putting tools that can be used for good or evil out into the world, even if it's just ideas, just how to do this stuff. And so... yeah, I'm hoping that Pursuance gets used by the right people. I'm hoping that, of course, the world ends up with no more Nazis. I'm hoping a million things. Yeah. I'm listening to a message from Barrett. Well, what I will say is he just sent me a message over an encrypted chat system, and it was that he agreed that we were done for the night, but he wanted it pointed out that we just were talking about someone who has some sort of power over internet related things here in America, and suddenly he couldn't get to Zoom.us anymore. Always an interesting time here when you're talking about these sorts of things, especially when you bring up those sorts of people and then suddenly lose access. So we'll see about that. But for now, just go forward, get some stuff done. I hope everyone enjoyed the show. We'll be back Wednesday. I'll be announcing the guests tomorrow afternoon, and I hope everyone subscribes, likes. I like food. I like going to the grocery store. So if you follow and subscribe, I can eat food. It's awesome. So thanks for helping out. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. And good night, everyone.